Hey everyone, welcome back to the Eternal Spoiler Breakdown. My name is Pojo, and today we're going to be going over 4 of the cards that have been released for Dead Reckoning. There have been 2 that we have reviewed so far, and 4 new ones have shown up. I talked about 2 of them on stream, but decided to re-record since we had access to 2 more, and I wanted to do it in a larger chunk as opposed to release a bunch of small videos. So we're going to go ahead and talk about Hooru Pacifier first, and the new sort of interesting meta-staple cards that are going to be added to the set. So the Dusk Road has released some pretty cool stuff, and a lot of the rebalancing has made a lot more of that stuff viable. But there are still some holes that are getting filled as far as certain factions in terms of how they represent, what kind of tools they have, and also like what sort of meta decks need answers and don't currently have them. And Hooru Pacifier is a card that is covering a lot of bases in sort of becoming a really interesting pushed Hooru card that can do quite a few things for the current state of the meta. So let's talk about it a little bit. It is a 3/4 flying Overwhelm. There's a couple of things to note about that. First off, the Overwhelm, while not that important, does give it a second skill, which is pretty relevant if you are planning on doing anything with Unseen. And this is an Unseen bird, so there are some cool like sort of faction capabilities that really want to play around with that Overwhelm ability. There's also not that many cards that actually have Overwhelm naturally, so it's a reasonable thing to put on a flyer if you want the flyer to basically just have the ability to get past a bunch of small blockers or something along those lines. Overall, that particular part of that particular skill doesn't matter too much to the power level of the card, but the card already has a lot of good stats for what is essentially a French vanilla, which is, it's really weird that it kind of qualifies as a French vanilla because it actually does 3 different things that are not what you would call a vanilla unit. It does have 3 different skills that are actually relevant. First is flying, the second is overwhelm, and the third is weapons can't be played, and we'll talk a little bit more about that one. But oftentimes, the thing that's most going to matter here is the fact that it is a 3/4 for 3, which if you are putting that on a flyer, that's a really good stat line. If you're putting that on a non-flyer, that's still a pretty okay stat line. It's above Torch, it's below Vanquish, it has enough pressure to really sort of pressure with a 3-drop. There have been a lot of cards with that stat line that actually do really, really well just for being what they are. And like you can see things like Seraph and other things in that particular vein, but as a flyer, this is one of the best statted flyers out there, and it's actually quite solid in that respect. It is hard to buff up above 3, so the Overwhelm actually gets a little bit difficult to activate here, but because it's such an aggressive unit, it is an instant belonging card in Hooru flyer decks pretty much all over the place. Okay. So the influence requirement, a little bit deep, double green and blue is tricky to hit, and there are some cards that have actually had this particular line that are not super playable yet, like there is a... Like, it's just, it's a little bit hard to put that all together, but because of the just general cost of this card, I think that's totally fine. This card is still going to see a lot of play in Hooru decks. Now, the weapons can't be played thing is specifically a shutdown to armory decks, so all of these sort of Ikaria type decks that you've seen with Auric Runehammer, basically anything that leads with Auric Runehammer is going to have a harder time with this card, because if you're doing good justice stuff, you're running Auric Runehammer, you're running Vanquish, you're running a couple of other cards, but Hooru Pacifier locks down all of that. It can't be vanquished, it can't be killed by Auric Runehammer, it can kind of be killed by cards like Entrapment, or it can be killed by Valkyrie Enforcer or Harsh Roll, and I think that we'll be seeing people having to actually run Valkyrie Enforcer in their like Ikaria decks now. So this is a minor nerf to that format, and it means that we will see a little bit less Ikaria on the ladder. I think that's pretty exciting. I think that overall this card is really, really healthy for the meta. It gives Hooru a little bit more extra power in a slot that it really doesn't have access to right now, and it's just very strong in general. So we can do some cool things with flyers with it, and should be really, really powerful, really fun card. So this one's definitely going to be a automatic 4 of in anything Hooru that you want to run. The next card that we are looking at is actually a really interesting 2-drop, and we don't have a good image of this one yet because it was spoiled on the disc. It was actually spoiled on Conley Woodstream, and there hasn't been a full image of it yet. But it's called Ripknife Assassin. It is a 2/2 for 2, and it's only 1 shadow influence. It is an Unseen. So we have a bunch of new Unseen here, which is really helping out Unseen Tribal. There's not enough Unseen right now, so having a little bit more access to that is going to be something useful, and we might even see an Unseen Tribal card in the upcoming set. So that could be really cool. Regardless, it has Warcry as a single shadow unit. This is the second of these cards that we've seen with a Shadow Warcry, and that's it's normally Recano trait, but we are seeing it on Shadow cards as well, which is evidence that Shadow is, or that Warcry is moving into a more almost evergreen status. We are actually going to see it on more and more cards. This is one of the only keyword abilities that has been repeated on cards in the third set. Like basically each set had like a unique, each of the different factions had a unique keyword. You had Empower, you had Warcry, Entomb, you had all sorts of like stuff like that, and basically this is one of the ones that is actually being moved around to other colors now, and we're starting to explore it in different spaces. This is a pretty good take on the sort of Recano Outlaw style of card, where you have Warcry on a second ability that gives you a bit more evasion. So Recano Outlaw has Quick Draw, which allows you to attack into small units without any fear, and also allows you to sometimes scare off big units due to your ability to just torch out. Ripknife Assassin has that similar unblockability quality to it, where it is very clearly going to trade with anything that it attacks into, so you can attack this into a Sandstorm Titan and your opponent might not actually want to block it, which means you get multiple Warcries off of it and you get to build out on that. It's another 2-skill unit for Unseen, which is really, really good. And I think overall it's slightly less strong than Recano Outlaw, but it's a solid replacement in the 2 slot for Argenport Instigator, which recently got that double shadow influence. And now we have 3 different particular competitors for that slot: Dream Snatcher, Ripknife Assassin, and Argenport Instigator. And all of them can actually go in the Stone Scar type decks, in any type of sort of aggressive Warcry or aggressive type of deck. So I think Ripknife Assassin is really interesting. Having a deadly unit is also something that you can have on defense. It's very rarely going to be a bad card. Deadly units are almost always on parity with other cards that you're going to be playing because they always demand at least one answer. But in general, this card should be like really solid overall, unless there's a really high Valkyrie Enforcer there's a really high like Valkyrie Enforcer count in the meta, because it just trades with everything, so it's really, really quite good. Yeah, I think this card is above average, but not like amazing. It's certainly just right there in the middle as far as 2-drops go, and it's definitely going to see some play, but it's a cool Warcry ability that we can actually see in Stone Scar. Maybe we'll see some more Stone Scar Warcry cards. Regardless, Warcry is a amazing mechanic. I'm glad to see it continuing to come back, and I really want to see more Warcry cards in the future, because it's just one of Eternal's basically best mechanics, and continuing to build it out and sort of explore the digital space and also take advantage of the digital space is really, really good times. Ripknife Assassin is a good card for fun games. Big units are fun. Playing cards that are buffed off of Warcries is fun, and this card is just like, it feels good to attack with. So it's a feel-good card, and it is good to play. So I think that's pretty cool. We're on to the 2 new ones. There were 2 spoiled on Sunday, and we are going to talk about both of those. One of them is Tripwire Grenadine, a 1/2 for 2 that has Summon, deal 1 damage, Entomb, deal 1 damage. So this card can potentially get you quite a bit in terms of countering aggro strategies, dealing with things like Oni Ronins. Actually, this card is kind of an Oni Ronin unseater if you are seeing just a huge amount of Stone Scar or Recano that's running like the Pyro Knight Oni Ronin huge 1-drop package. If aggro ever gets too fast, then a Grenadine deck with Tripwire Grenadine is going to feel really, really good in that meta. So that's one sort of slot that the card fills. As a 1/2, the stat line's not that great. The Summon effect is very good, and the Entomb effect is very good. You can sacrifice this to deal some damage to your opponent. You can of course just get 1 damage across. Like, this card is a significant amount better than either Forge Wolf or Firemane Cub, just because the potential of this card to get like 3-for-1s against early aggro decks, to pop Aegises, to do all sorts of like little tiny things that'll just help you out in the long run. It triggers Sparks, which is really, really critical. This is actually a card that enables a lot of cool Skycrag archetypes that you would not otherwise be able to enable. Like, you just get to play it down, you get to zap something, then you get to attack. You will automatically get that 1 damage if it is defended against, so you can trigger your Sparks for things like Kindle, for things like Mullet Nakova, for any type of cool spark effect. So Tripwire Grenadine is a really interesting spark card, a really interesting Grenadine card, and a really good Entomb card. If you're playing with any type of sacrifice effects, this is a card that really has some innate value to it. I would not say it's innately strong, and I wouldn't say that it goes in every deck, but there are very specific niches that it fills into, and it fills those slots very well. I think that it is just doing enough things that you can actually get some good stuff. So you have an answer to decks with Aegis, you have an answer to decks with lots of 1-drops, and you have something that fills that meta hole for basically just Grenadines in general, getting some cool Entomb effects out. Good card. I am certainly down with it. I think it's below average strength, but the Summon plus Entomb is actually quite good if it all lines up correctly. So this card is definitely worth playing in Grenadine. Alright, and that leads us to our last one, Mitotic Wisp. This one's really interesting. Alright, Mitotic Wisp is a 2-cost 0/3 in Xenon. Flying, your Radiants cost 1 less, and with the ultimate, when 7 other units go to the void, draw a Radiant of your choice from your deck. Okay, a lot of stuff to go through here. First off, Shadowlands Tyrant, I have said many times, is a very good card. And if you're playing like a heavy Xenon type deck, you can certainly roll 4-cost Shadowlands Tyrants off of this. That's not that bad a deal. This card is like a minor ramp card for Radiant Matters decks. We actually built a Radiant deck recently called Radiant Array, which I believe I have a Eternal Bruise up on, and it's in purple and red, but we might be able to adjust that for purple and yellow because there are, of course, Radiants in both of those colors, and you can do some really cool things with Radiance and Common Cause. So we finally have a Radiant Tribal card that's really helping out those cards and basically making it easier to play certain things. A lot of the Radiants are very high influence. Umbran Reaper, Shadowlands Tyrant, those are both cards that I really want to see at 4, but it's also pretty hard to play them at 4. You kind of need to have banners and seats, and I can't remember if Xenon has a crest or not, but you kind of have to get all of that going. I'm pretty sure that Xenon is one of the only colors without a crest. So getting the influence going is still something that really matters, but the Radiance cost 1 less is the thing that has the most immediate impact on the board and makes Mitotic Wisp something that you kind of have to kill. That being said, that ultimate is actually pretty decent. It is a very high cost. 7 other units into the void is slow to do and not very easy in a lot of scenarios. However, one thing to notice is that the units go to the void, first off, does include your opponent's stuff, and in a high removal set, this will just sort of happen naturally. You can play Mitotic Wisp down. You don't have to try too hard for it, but being able to pick up whatever Radiant you like is actually pretty cool stuff, and we might actually go through the list of Radiants at the end of this video, just to sort of check it out and see if there's anything cool that we can summon up. But basically, it is something that can happen pretty naturally. You don't feel too bad about Mitotic Wisp having this ultimate, even though it is something that's not terribly easy to fulfill. You want Mitotic Wisp to draw removal because it is a small 2-drop, so that part's okay. It also stands in the way of some aggro and can be like kind of a mild blockade for small 1 to 2-drop units. Now, so I think that there is enough going on with this card that this is actually reasonably strong in a Radiant deck. I don't think that if you are playing a heavy Radiant deck, you're going to feel sad about having Mitotic Wisp in there. However, if you want to go Johnny with it, there are other things that you can do that are actually pretty interesting. Mitotic Wisp actually does work with some specific cards that you would not see a lot of if you're trying to play sort of a Reanimator type effect, or something that works with cards like Azindil's Gift, Azindil the Wayfinder, Mask of Torment. You can play with like this whole mill archetype because it is when your units go to the void. It doesn't actually say that those units have to be in play. So any sort of card that inflicts self-mill on you can actually create the ability to draw this Radiant faster. If you're playing a heavy Sporefolk deck trying to get that Grasping at Shadows thing working, this is a new way to enable that now that Vara is gone. You can actually do some cool things with extra value by drawing free Radiants from your deck and drawing the right Radiant for the job. Now, the question is, are there Radiants that are strong enough to do this? And I think we'll actually just go through the list and see if there's particular things that you really want to grab when you're playing a Radiant deck. Alright, so we can certainly just check this real quick. Radiants, right? Here's our Radiants. We have a huge pile of them. They're in both colors. They're yellow and purple. You can throw Dawnwalkers into the deck, of course, because if you're playing a Radiant deck that's going to be focused on the Void, then Dawnwalkers are really good to throw into your Void. You have cards like Lumen Reclaimer, which can be good if your deck is doing a lot of self-mill, so you can actually have the sort of fixer for that. You can build a cool deck around that. Steward of the Past is a really good one-of to pick up in case you need to shut down a Void strategy in a hurry. That one's really solid. Dream Snatcher has a bit of an end game presence, so that's a cool one-of, or even a 4-of, because it's already a solid Radiant. Most of the Radiants are very good cards all on their own. Waystone Infuser and Lumen Defender. They're very, very good cards that happen to do quite a lot to either stymie aggro or to solve a sort of a late game power issue and actually get you going on a little bit more card advantage. So there's card advantage engines in Radiance, which are pretty cool. For finishers, we don't have a lot. We have World Joiner at 9, but pretty much all Radiance cost 5 or less. However, there are a lot of them that will give you life or give you some ability to deal damage to your opponent. Cards like Shadowlands Tyrant, Umbran Reaper, and it's possible that we'll see more Radiance in the future that can actually do a lot more on that front. Beyond that, I don't think that Malediction Reader, Umbran Thirster, or Umbran Coaxer really do a lot. We don't really want to play like Lumen Shepherd, although you can certainly Fate for 1/1/1 Wisp, which is kind of cute. So there's some ways that you could like maybe... So there's a cute trick here where if you have a 1 of Lumen Shepherd in your deck and you're being attacked by a bunch of different things, you can do something like annihilate a unit to get that 7th trigger, pull a Lumen Shepherd, put a 1/1 Wisp into play, and then block the Oni Ronin. So, like, that kind of toolkit play is sort of what you're looking for when you're playing with Mitosis Wisp. So if you can get that kind of thing done, then yeah, it's actually really quite worth it. I don't think there's any other major Fate effects. We have Steward of Prophecy, which is an okay hand removal card. Premonition Wisp is definitely not the card that you want to get, but, you know, just looking at all of the Radiance, there's currently a lot of small toolkit cards. They'll all be very playable once you get Mitosis Wisp out there, but if you are playing with that sort of throw into the void mix combined with like Grasping at Shadows or Dark Return, then you might actually be able to get quite a bit done. And I think that could have a place in Umbran Reaper recycle decks or anything along those lines. So yeah, Mitotic Wisp is interesting. This one is going to be one of the stranger cards to play with. I'm not 100% certain it's good yet, but I do think that 4-cost Radiance can be very scary, especially if you're playing on a high Umbran Reaper style deck, because Umbran Reapers are devastatingly good cards, and if you're playing with a lot of them and you're also drawing even more, then your opponent has to have very specific answers to that, or they're going to have problems with basically your ability to sacrifice and play other units. Beyond that, like, this card is certainly something you have to build around, which means it's got very limited design space. It only belongs in a couple of specific decks, but there is the chance that this is actually going to be a card that you can use. So a little bit below average, but an interesting Johnny rare that you might actually be able to play some really cool things with. So I'm interested to see if anyone comes up with some cool decks with this. I think that it's all going to be about what numbers of Radiance you have and what kind of setup that has. And if that happens, then it'll be a pretty solid card. But yeah, really, really cool stuff. All right, that's it for the card breakdowns, the patch breakdowns for today. We will be working on Eternal Basics and testing out some new decks this week. I'm pretty excited about it and looking forward to like having a pretty good time. I'm still getting settled in after the new move, so we're trying to keep content going as much as possible, and hopefully I'll be back in full swing this week. It's been really fun, and I'm looking forward to having much more stuff out for you guys soon. So feel free to like and subscribe if you like the video, and I will see you next time. Have a really good night. Cheers.